The yellow paper fluttered against my gate like a trapped bird, its edges curling in the morning breeze. Steam rose from my coffee cup as I stood there, boots planted in gravel worn smooth by generations of footsteps, watching Karen and her two polo shirt companions arrange themselves like actors preparing for opening night. The sun hadn't yet burned off the dew, and the valley below us stretched misty and golden, my cattle moving through it like shadows. 3 identical SUVs sat along the road's edge, their chrome catching the early light. My old border collie pressed against my leg, a low rumble building in her throat. Karen raised a portable speaker to her lips, though we stood no more than 10 feet apart. Her oversized sunglasses reflected my weathered face back at me, distorted and small. Behind her, neighbors from the subdivision gathered with their phones raised, recording what they assumed would be my humiliation. Per the decision of the Valley View Estates Homeowners Association, her amplified voice echoed off the hillside, "You are hereby evicted from this property for repeated and egregious violations of community standards." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. The paper on my gate listed infractions that read like poetry written by someone who'd never set foot on working land. Unsafe animals. Unapproved structures. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards. "You're evicting me from my own farm?" The question came out steady, almost curious. Her painted lips curved into the smile of someone who believed she'd already won. "The community has spoken. You have 30 days to vacate." Behind her, more residents trickled down from their matching houses, drawn by the spectacle. I recognized a few faces, the young couple who'd waved when they first moved in, the retired teacher who sometimes bought eggs from me, the single father whose kids pressed their faces against car windows to see my horses. "Karen," I said, setting my mug on the fence post with deliberate care, "you're trying to evict the wrong man." She tapped her clipboard against her palm. "The law is clear. This land falls under our jurisdiction as part of the Valley View community environment." I let my gaze drift past her to the sprawling acreage that had been in my family for over a century. The morning light painted the fields gold and green, the river winding through them like a silver thread. She saw a view from her hilltop house. What she didn't understand was that I owned every acre her eyes could touch. "No," I said simply. "It doesn't. To understand the weight of that moment, you need to know what this valley means. My great-grandfather bought the first 40 acres with money saved from working railroad camps, his hands scarred from laying track across the frontier. He chose this spot where the river bent, where the soil ran deep and dark, where the hills formed a natural bowl that held morning fog like cupped palms. Over decades, our family added to it piece by piece. When the Hendersons' dairy failed during the Depression, we bought their eastern fields. When Old Man Torres died without heirs, his river frontage became ours. My grandfather once told me that land was like trust: you built it slowly, protected it fiercely, and passed it on stronger than you found it. By the time I took over, our name was written across this entire valley. Not just on deeds and surveys, but in the fence lines my father and I repaired together, in the irrigation channels we dug by hand, in the trees we planted that now towered over the barn. This wasn't just property. It was ancestry made tangible. The subdivision came like frost in late spring, unexpected and unwelcome. First the surveyors with their bright flags and measuring tapes. Then the earth movers carving terraces into the hillside where deer used to graze. The developer, a smooth-talking man from the city, assured me the homes would be respectful of the rural character. Those words proved as substantial as smoke. Valley View Estates sprouted overnight, a grid of identical houses with perfect lawns that required more water than my entire herd. The new residents brought their expectations with them: silence after dark, manicured landscapes, the kind of ordered existence that comes wrapped in HOA covenants. Most kept their distance, content to admire the view from their decks. But then Karen arrived, moving into the largest house on the highest lot, and immediately set about reshaping the world to match her vision. The first letter came 6 months after she was elected HOA president. I found it tucked into my mailbox between the electric bill and a flyer for the local feed store. "Dear resident," it began, as if I were just another occupant of her domain. It listed violations I didn't know existed: non-conforming structures, agricultural odors, visible equipment storage. I tacked it to the barn wall, where it joined decades of more important papers: vaccination records, breeding charts, weather patterns. Let her write her letters, I thought. Words on paper didn't change the truth of the land. But Karen was the kind of person who confused persistence with power. The letters multiplied, each more demanding than the last. She photographed my property from the fence line with a telephoto lens. She filed complaints with the county that were dismissed as soon as inspectors saw I was running a legal farming operation. She held meetings where she painted me as a threat to property values and child safety. Did you know, I overheard her telling a group of residents at the grocery store that he refuses to contain his animals properly? What if one of them attacked a child? The animals she feared were cattle, placid Herefords who wanted nothing more than grass and quiet. But in Karen's mind, anything that didn't conform to her suburban vision was a danger to be eliminated. The morning of her eviction attempt, I stood at my kitchen window watching the sun paint the valley gold. Coffee steamed in my grandfather's mug, the same one he'd drunk from while planning which fields to plant. Outside, the world was waking up, birds calling, cattle lowing, the eternal rhythm of a working farm. But something was different. The usual quiet of dawn was broken by the sound of engines. Through the window, I saw vehicles gathering at my gate like wasps around a nest. Karen's white SUV led the pack, followed by 2 matching vehicles and a growing cluster of curious neighbors. By the time I walked down the drive, she had arranged her tableau. The yellow notice taped to my gate fluttered like a flag of war. Her 2 companions, broad-shouldered men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, flanked her with practiced symmetry. The gathering crowd held up phones, ready to document what they assumed would be my defeat. But as I stood there, watching her theatrical presentation, I felt something my father had taught me: the deep calm that comes from knowing the ground you stand on. Let her wave her papers and make her declarations. The valley had been here before her, and it would be here long after she was gone. When I told her she was trying to evict the wrong man, I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross her face. It was brief, hidden quickly behind her practiced smile, but it was there. Because somewhere in that moment, perhaps she sensed what I knew with bedrock certainty. She wasn't fighting a farmer. She was fighting the valley itself. The metal box lived under my father's bed for 40 years before it moved under mine. Heavy as a feed sack, painted industrial green, with a lock that opened to a key worn smooth by generations of fingers. Inside, layered like sediment, was the true history of this valley. The original deed, written in fountain pen on paper that felt like cloth, described boundaries in terms that predated GPS, from the large oak at the river bend to the granite outcrop on the eastern ridge. My great-grandfather's signature sat bold at the bottom, witnessed by men whose descendants still farmed neighboring valleys. But it was the accumulation of documents that told the real story. Water rights dating back to when California was still figuring out what water meant. Easement agreements signed when the first roads were cut through, granting passage but retaining ownership. Mineral rights. Grazing rights. Rights I didn't even know existed until I read them by lamplight, trying to understand what Karen was threatening. The developer who built Valley View Estates had been careful, or so he thought. His lawyers had secured easements for the access road that wound up from the highway, cutting across the northeast corner of my land. They'd negotiated rights to run water and sewer lines through the valley, tapping into the municipal systems that fed the growing town beyond. But easements aren't ownership. They're permission. And permission comes with conditions. I spread the documents across my kitchen table like a general planning a campaign. The access road easement specified reasonable use for residential traffic. The utility easements came with restoration requirements and limitations. Every agreement acknowledged one fundamental fact: the land belonged to me. More interesting still were the assumptions built into the subdivision's planning documents. The developer had marketed the homes as having permanent valley views and protected green space. The HOA's founding documents referenced the pastoral setting and maintaining the rural character of adjacent lands. They'd sold a dream based on my family's century of work, then tried to control it as if it were their own. Dale arrived as the sun was setting, his truck kicking up dust as he parked beside the barn. We'd known each other since high school, when he was planning to be a farmer like his father and I was certain I'd never leave the valley. Life had taken him to law school instead, but he still understood land in a way that city lawyers never could. "Show me everything," he said, settling into a chair with the focused attention of a man who'd spent his career defending property rights. We worked until midnight, sorting documents into piles. Deeds here. Easements there. Water rights in their own stack. By the time we finished, the table looked like a paper map of the valley itself. "You know what you have here?" Dale asked, holding up the access road easement. "You have leverage. Legal, binding leverage." He explained it simply. The HOA needed that road, it was their only paved access to the outside world. They needed those utility lines, without them, Valley View Estates was just a collection of houses on a hill. And every bit of it crossed my land under agreements that gave me more power than Karen had ever imagined. "But I don't want to hurt anyone," I said. "The family's up there, they're just trying to live their lives." Dale smiled. "You don't have to hurt anyone. You just have to show them the truth. Karen's been telling them a story about who controls what. Time to tell them a different one." We drafted the notices that night, careful and precise. Not threats, just facts. Reminders of what the easements actually said. Clarifications about where HOA authority ended and property rights began. Information that should have been clear from the start but had been buried under years of Karen's assertions. The first notice went to the county, alerting them to the HOA's attempt to exceed its authority. The second went to every utility and service company that used the access road. The third went to the HOA itself, with copies for every board member. "You're putting them on notice," Dale explained. "Making it clear that you know your rights and won't let them be trampled. It's defensive, not aggressive. But it shifts the ground under their feet." As I signed each document, I thought about my father's way of handling disputes. He never raised his voice, never made threats. He just stood firm on what was his and waited for the truth to settle like dust after wind. This felt like something he would understand. The response came faster than I expected. Within days, delivery drivers were stopping at my gate, asking about road access. The garbage company called, wanting clarification. Even the school district reached out, concerned about bus routes. I told them all the same thing: nothing's changing for essential services. I just want people to understand whose land they're crossing. But in the subdivision, something was shifting. The story Karen had told, about the valley being part of their community, about her right to control it, was starting to crack. People who'd never questioned her authority were suddenly asking to see surveys and deeds. Board members who'd rubber-stamped her initiatives were demanding legal opinions. And Karen herself? She'd gone quiet. No more letters. No more photography sessions at my fence. Just silence, which in its way was louder than all her proclamations. The court summons arrived on a Thursday, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic. Karen had filed an official complaint, trying to force her eviction threat into legal reality. She claimed the farm was a nuisance, that I was interfering with the HOA's rightful authority, that the valley was essential to their community's character. It was, Dale said with satisfaction, exactly what we'd hoped for. She's taking it to court, he explained. That means neutral ground. Facts matter there, not just force of personality. And the facts. He gestured at our table full of documents. The facts are on your side. The courtroom smelled like old paper and floor polish, nothing like the earth and grass I was used to. I sat beside Dale, wearing my father's suit, the one he'd bought for my mother's funeral and I'd worn to his. Across the aisle, Karen perched with perfect posture, her lawyer shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. The gallery held a scattering of neighbors from the subdivision. Some I recognized as her supporters, others looked merely curious. In the back row sat Harris, the man who tried to moderate her extremes at board meetings. He nodded when our eyes met. Judge Martinez was younger than I expected, with careful eyes and economical movements. She listened as Karen's lawyer painted a picture of me as an obstinate threat to a peaceful community, refusing to conform to reasonable standards, creating hazards for families and children. The Homeowners Association, he declared, has both the right and the responsibility to maintain standards throughout the Valley View community. The defendant's property is an integral part of that community, and his refusal to comply with basic requirements poses unacceptable risks. He presented photos: my cattle grazing, my barn with its weathered boards, my equipment parked beside the shed. In his telling, these were evidence of negligence and decay. Never mind that the cattle were healthy, the barn was structurally sound, and the equipment was how I made my living. When Dale stood to respond, he carried just one thing, the original valley map, mounted now on poster board. He set it on an easel where everyone could see. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about a simple question: where does the HOA's authority end? I'll show you exactly where, at my client's property line." He traced the boundaries with his finger, showing how the subdivision perched on its hilltop while the valley spread below, separate and distinct. Then he presented our documents, one by one. The deeds. The easements. The water rights. The paper trail that showed a century of ownership, unbroken and absolute. "The HOA has no more right to control my client's farm," Dale said, "than they do to control the highway that runs past it. They can make all the rules they want for their subdivision. But their authority stops at their property line, and their access to utilities depends entirely on my client's continued cooperation." Karen couldn't contain herself. "That's blackmail," she burst out. "He's threatening our entire community." Judge Martinez's gavel came down once, sharp. "Ma'am, you'll have your chance to respond through counsel." But the damage was done. Her outburst revealed what this had always been about: control. She'd built her power on the assumption that the valley was hers to command, and discovering otherwise had shaken her foundation. The judge took her time with the documents, reading carefully, asking pointed questions. How long had my family owned the land? When were the easements granted? What exactly did the HOA's charter say about properties outside the subdivision? Each answer built the wall higher between Karen's claims and reality. Finally, Judge Martinez set down the last paper and removed her reading glasses. The courtroom held its breath. "I've seen many property disputes," she said. "But rarely one where the facts are this clear. The defendant owns the valley. He is not a member of the plaintiff's HOA. The association has no authority over his property, no right to fine him, and certainly no right to evict him from land his family has owned for generations." She turned to Karen's lawyer. "Your client appears to have fundamentally misunderstood the scope of her authority. Worse, she's used association resources to pursue a legal action that had no merit from the beginning. The court finds for the defendant on all counts." The gavel came down with finality. But Judge Martinez wasn't done. "I'll add this," she said, looking directly at Karen. "The defendant has shown remarkable restraint. He holds easements that your entire community depends on, yet he's made no move to restrict them. Perhaps you should consider that before pursuing any further action against him." As we filed out, neighbors surrounded Dale and me. Some shook my hand. Others just nodded and hurried away. Karen pushed through the crowd, her face flushed but her chin still high. She paused at the door, turned back to look at me. "This isn't over," she said. But we both knew it was. The real end came not in court but at a Tuesday night HOA meeting, 3 weeks later. I wasn't there, I had no reason to be. But Harris called me afterward, his voice mixing exhaustion with relief. "She's out," he said simply. "Voted out as president, removed from the board entirely. When the residents found out she'd spent $30,000 of HOA funds on a lawsuit she couldn't win, against someone who wasn't even under HOA authority, well, that was it. He paused, and I could hear voices in the background, the sound of change happening. I'm the new president, he continued. Temporarily, anyway. And the first thing I want to do is meet with you properly. No lawyers. No threats. Just neighbors talking about how to coexist. We met the next morning at my gate, coffee steaming in the cool air. Harris was older than I'd thought, with the kind of weathered hands that suggested he'd worked with them before moving to management. I grew up on a ranch in Montana, he said, surprising me. I know what it means to work land. When I retired here, I thought I was getting the best of both worlds, nice house, beautiful views, but still connected to something real. He gestured at the valley spreading below us. I didn't realize we were trying to control what made it beautiful in the first place. We talked for an hour. About boundaries and respect. About the difference between viewing land and understanding it. About how two communities, one suburban, one agricultural, could exist side by side without trying to consume each other. What do you want? He asked finally. I thought about it, watching my cattle move slowly through the morning mist. Just what I've always wanted. To farm my land in peace. To not have someone with a clipboard telling me my barn's the wrong color or my cows are too loud. To be a neighbor, not a problem to be solved. Harris nodded. I think we can do that. The changes came gradually. The hostile letters stopped. The photographers at my fence disappeared. At the next HOA meeting, Harris introduced new bylaws that explicitly recognized the boundaries of their authority. They even added a statement acknowledging the historic agricultural nature of the surrounding valley and committing to respectful coexistence with neighboring properties. Some residents grumbled. A few who'd bought into Karen's vision of total community control sold their houses and moved. But most seemed relieved to step back from a war they'd never really wanted. Karen herself left Valley View Estates 6 months later. I saw the moving truck from my porch, watched it wind slowly up the access road and disappear over the hill. She never looked back, never acknowledged the valley she tried so hard to claim. New families moved in, drawn by the views and the peace. Some of them wave when they pass my gate. A few have asked about buying fresh eggs or bringing their kids to see the calves in spring. The subdivision and the farm have found a rhythm, like the river and its banks, separate but connected, each respecting the other's nature.